one of the most shocking facts that I've uncovered is just how many people we're talking about here. You know, looking at assimilation records, birth rates, mixed marriage rates, and talking to statisticians and mathematicians, I have conservatively estimated that 60,000 half-Jews and 90,000 quarter-Jews served in the German armed forces during World War II. Now, these 150,000 so-called Michelin soldiers represent a small group to the total size of the German armed forces. By 1945, over 17.5 million men went through the ranks of the Wehrmacht, so these 150,000 Michelin soldiers represent less than 1% of the total manpower of the German armed forces. But in light of the Holocaust, this number is quite shocking, especially because of the problems that they created with their service. Hitler would actually sit down and look at applications from guys, and pictures were very important for him, side and front shots of these guys. And if phenotypically, if they looked Aryan, you know, blonde, blue-eyed, you know, big, strong, if they had good military backgrounds, he would then give them the kosher stamp of approval to be an Aryan. And Hitler was doing this all throughout his regime, all the way up to 44, I've documented. And there's even one person who I've interviewed that said he got an exemption in 45. Now, in 42, at the height of the Battle of Stalingrad, Hitler was also looking at these applications, many of them who were privates. I mean, maybe one can understand the careful analysis of the pros and cons for a general, but many of these guys were grunts who had no bearing on the war's outcome. And this shows us just how obsessed that Hitler was with his racial ideology. I mean, Hitler had nothing better to do than at the height of the Battle of Stalingrad than to look at a person's application to see if he had blonde hair enough or blue eyes enough to be declared of German blood. I mean, Hitler was obviously convinced that he could only give a person a German blood declaration, that he was the expert on racial matters. And he also shows with this activity that he believed an Aryan society was more important than focusing on winning the war. So that was something that was consistently shocking to me about how much time Hitler engaged with Michelin policy, especially giving them exemptions. But with this in mind, I think it's very important to realize that if Hitler focused so much on these partial Jews and the policy affecting them, how much more time was he giving to the policy toward the Jews and their extermination? A lot of people out there, a few Holocaust deniers will say, there's no orders out there that Hitler, signed to kill the Jews. So he may have not known about it, which is absolute nonsense. Hitler definitely knew about it, and he ordered it. And most of the orders he gave, even with Michelin policy, were oral, done orally. And then people wrote them down and then enacted them. Same way that he did with the extermination. Hitler ordered it because, he wanted these people systematically exterminated. So I think that's something also that's very interesting that this research teaches us, is just how intimately involved he was with the minutiae of racial ideology and implementing his racial ideas as laws. Also, I believe it's very important for telling us about the loyalties that these people struggled with. And many of them came from very strong military backgrounds. Their fathers, their grandfathers, their uncles had all served in the German military, and they didn't see their service as anything different. They're serving the fatherland. Yes, many of them knew about persecution. They knew about deportation of their relatives, but they thought their service would help protect themselves and then also their relatives. And so this is a sad dilemma that many of them were put in. Let's not forget that when we're talking about the strong tradition of military service, that in World War I, 100,000 German Jews served in the German armed forces out of a population of 550,000. 12,000 of them died. More German Jews died in the German military in World War I from 1914 to 1918 than all Israeli conflicts from 1948 to 1982. Now, in the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, because let's not forget that in 1938 Hitler took over Austria, and many of these men had strong military backgrounds with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And in World War I, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire had 300,000 Jews who served in its armed forces. 25,000 Jews died in its armed forces during World War I alone. So these men, serving in the military was not strange to them. And many of them felt that this would help, them get back to the level that they were at before Hitler came in, get back to the equal status in society where they were before Hitler came into power. And that's a sad tragedy, because what actually would happen to most of these half-Jews who served in the military had Hitler won the war, God forbid, was that they would have been exterminated. Because once you kill off their parents, you can't have their kids running around. And quarter Jews would have been probably selectively sterilized, and in some cases, as the decree was written, they would also have been exterminated if they looked too Jewish. So that was a sad fate that awaited, these Michelin veterans. I think another thing that's very important, what this history tells us about, is just how complicated it was to know about the facts of the Holocaust. When I began this research, I thought that most of these men would know about the Holocaust. How could they not know? I mean, on average, many of them lost 7 to 8 relatives in the Holocaust. Shockingly, I found the opposite to be true. Yes, many of these men knew about deportations, but where their relatives were being deported to was beyond their knowledge. Many of them knew about concentration camps, but what actually was going on in the camps was beyond their imaginations. Some of them knew about executions going on in the East, but many of them thought, or many of them rationalized, that these executions were for partisans or prisoners of war or criminals. Most of these men did not know that when their relatives were deported, they were most often deported to their deaths. And the most telling fact to prove these men's ignorance is the story of half-Jews in the organization the OT forced labor camps.